The Supreme Commander of the Corvette Dominion leaned forward on his throne of polished obsidian, his elongated fingers tapping rhythmically against the armrests. His luminous, black eyes surveyed the Grand Council chamber, where holographic maps of the Milky Way hovered, pulsating with the soft hum of energy. The target of their latest conquest blinked faintly in the center of the display. Earth, a blue-green speck nestled in an unremarkable solar system. A species, he thought, barely worth the effort. Yet here they were, finalizing the details of an operation meant to wipe humanity from the stars. Our scouts report that the humans have fractured allegiances, primitive weapons, and no centralized military command. The commander intoned, his voice a sharp, echoing resonance that commanded silence. They possess spacefaring capabilities, but are reliant on rudimentary propulsion technology. This conquest will be swift, efficient. From the edges of the chamber, murmurs of agreement rippled through the ranks of Corvette officers and advisors. To them, the humans were little more than a nuisance, a minor species punching far above its weight by dabbling in interstellar exploration. They'd crushed dozens like them before. Humanity, as a concept, held no novelty. One figure among the gathered council stood rigid, his posture betraying unease. Subcommander Zachary, younger and sharper than most of his peers, cleared his throat and stepped forward, his claws glinting under the chamber's harsh light. Permission to speak freely, Supreme Commander? The room grew still. Zachary's pale lavender skin, a mark of his clan's cautious nature, stood out starkly against the darker hues of his peers. His eyes flicked briefly to the hologram before meeting the commander's gaze. Granted, came the response, though laced with irritation. Zachary clasped his hands behind his back, choosing his words carefully. Our preliminary reports suggest that humanity thrives under pressure. Their history is rife with conflicts, yet they consistently emerge stronger, more unified. Their technological advancements, though erratic, often accelerate exponentially in times of crisis. I urge caution, Supreme Commander. Overconfidence may breed. Enough, the commander snapped, his voice a whip crack through the air. We are the Corvette. Our fleets blot out suns. Our warriors bend civilizations to their knees. Do you believe this genus of barely sentient bipeds will be the exception? He leaned closer, his voice now a low growl. Your hesitation is unbecoming. Learn to trust the Dominion's might. Chastened but unbowed, Zachary inclined his head and retreated. His unease, however, lingered. Something about humanity, their unpredictability, their adaptability, gnawed at the edges of his thoughts like an unrelenting tide. The fleet departed 3 rotations later, cutting through the vacuum of space with silent menace. The Corvette invasion force, a fleet of 100 warships, converged on the Sol system, their sleek, obsidian vessels gliding effortlessly past asteroid fields and planetary defenses. They arrived at the outer reaches of the system without resistance. The humans, it seemed, were woefully unprepared. As the fleet neared Mars, Zachary observed the first skirmish from the bridge of the Dominion's flagship Invincible. Human ships, smaller and cruder than their Corvette counterparts, scrambled to intercept the invaders. Zachary studied their movements on the tactical display. At first glance, their strategy appeared chaotic, almost panicked. Yet as the minutes ticked by, a pattern emerged. The human ships attacked in small, coordinated bursts, drawing Corvette vessels into the asteroid belt. There, hidden mines detonated with precision, damaging 3 warships before the Corvette adapted. It wasn't enough to shift the tide of battle, but it was enough to make Zachary's unease deepen. Their tactics are rudimentary, scoffed Fleet Master Vosk, standing beside him. The older Corvette's voice carried the gravelly authority of decades spent waging war. Clever traps, but nothing that can halt us. Zachary nodded, but said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the display as another human ship sacrificed itself to create an opening for its squadron to escape. Each loss seemed deliberate, calculated, as though every ship was playing a role in a larger, unseen strategy. The battle ended with a decisive Corvette victory. Human ships retreated to Earth's orbit, leaving behind the wreckage of their comrades. On the surface, it seemed like confirmation of everything the Supreme Commander had promised, a broken species fleeing before the might of the Dominion. Yet as Zachary scanned the reports, noting the number of Corvette casualties and damaged ships, he couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was testing them, probing for weaknesses. The fleet pressed onward, arriving at Earth's orbit days later. The planet loomed below, serene and vibrant, its oceans reflecting sunlight like liquid sapphires. It was beautiful in a way that made Zachary uneasy. Beauty, he had learned, often concealed hidden dangers. From the surface, the humans sent a message, one the Corvette had anticipated but had not prepared for. The message wasn't a plea for mercy or an offer of surrender. Instead, it was a simple declaration of defiance, delivered by a human leader whose voice carried both steel and fire. "This is General Marcus Steele of the United Terran Alliance," the message began. "To the Corvette Dominion we say this: you have made a grave mistake. Humanity does not cower. We do not yield. You may think us weak, divided, primitive. But you will learn, as others have before you, that humanity is far more than the sum of its parts. Welcome to Earth. You won't leave intact." The words echoed through the Invincible's bridge like a challenge hurled across a battlefield. Fleet Master Vosk smirked, dismissing the message as bluster. But Zachary felt his claws tighten involuntarily. He recognized something in Steele's voice, something that should have given the Corvette pause. As the fleet prepared to descend upon Earth, Zachary couldn't help but voice his concerns one final time. "Supreme Commander, might I suggest a more measured approach? Humanity's resolve appears stronger than anticipated." "Perhaps." The commander silenced him with a glare. "You waste your breath, Sub-Commander. We end this today." And so the order was given. The fleet descended, their weapons primed to reduce Earth's cities to ash. But as they broke through the planet's atmosphere, the Corvette learned their first, bitter lesson about humanity. The species they had deemed insignificant had been preparing. And they had prepared well. The Corvette fleet hovered above Earth, a shadow blotting out the light of the sun. From orbit, the planet seemed deceptively peaceful, its swirling clouds and glittering oceans betraying no sign of the chaos about to unfold. Supreme Commander Zara stood at the helm of the Invincible, his expression carved from stone. Around him, officers barked commands, orchestrating the opening salvos of the assault. Humanity's defiance had been noted, but it would not be tolerated. The first wave of bombardments struck Earth's orbital defenses, targeting satellites, communication relays, and early warning systems. Initial reports suggested a near-total success. Human installations were obliterated in minutes. Yet something was wrong. Zachary, stationed at a tactical console, frowned as the patterns of destruction unfolded before him. "This isn't everything," he murmured under his breath. Humanity's orbital defenses were minimal, too minimal for a species that had supposedly united against an existential threat. It felt deliberate, like bait. Moments later, his suspicions were confirmed. A series of small, nimble ships emerged from the shadow of the moon, firing concentrated bursts of kinetic rounds. The projectiles tore through the exposed flanks of Corvette ships with shocking precision. Though their armor was superior, the angles of attack bypassed their shields. Zachary's claws dug into the console as alarms blared across the bridge. "Countermaneuvers," barked Fleet Master Vosk. "Eliminate those vessels before they regroup." The Corvette ships responded swiftly, unleashing swarms of drones to chase the human ships. Yet for every vessel destroyed, another appeared, darting in and out of asteroid fields, using the debris as cover. What the humans lacked in firepower, they made up for in creativity. Their attacks were not aimed to destroy, but to disrupt, targeting supply ships, ammunition storage, and energy relays. The Corvette fleet's cohesion began to falter. On Earth's surface, General Marcus Steele monitored the battle from a command bunker buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The dim room was alive with activity, holographic projections displaying the ebb and flow of the conflict. Steele's jaw tightened as reports came in. Losses were mounting, but the Corvette were bleeding, too, and bleeding more than they'd likely anticipated. "Status on the Aegis cannons?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "They're online and ready, General," replied Dr. Elena Morales, her fingers flying across a control panel. Morales, the architect behind many of Earth's defenses, was a force of nature in her own right. Her hair was tied back in a no-nonsense knot, and her eyes burned with determination. "The cannons have a clear line of sight on the fleet's central command ships." Steele nodded. "Good. Hold fire until they cluster near the upper atmosphere. We'll make it count." Morales hesitated for a moment. "We're still outmatched, General. Even with the Aegis system, this is ambitious." Steele allowed himself a small smile. "Ambition is all we've got, Doctor. Let's remind them why they should have left us alone." The Corvette, for all their arrogance, had underestimated humanity's capacity to adapt. Over the past months, every corner of Earth had mobilized. Nations that had once squabbled over borders now worked in unison, pooling resources and knowledge to prepare for this day. Prototypes that had languished in development were pushed into production, and old mining vessels were refitted as makeshift warships. What humanity lacked in polish, they made up for in sheer ingenuity. Above the atmosphere, the Corvette fleet reorganized, their commanders adjusting tactics to counter the humans' unorthodox attacks. The Supreme Commander sneered at the chaos unfolding on the tactical display. "They scramble like insects," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Increase firepower. Burn them out." But just as the Corvette tightened their grip, humanity sprang its next trap. Across Earth's surface, hidden launch sites activated, unleashing swarms of missiles into orbit. These were no ordinary projectiles. Their warheads were packed with electromagnetic pulses, designed to cripple the advanced systems of Corvette vessels. Within seconds, the fleet's shields flickered and died, leaving them vulnerable. "Report," Zara demanded, his voice rising for the first time. "Our systems are compromised," an officer replied, panic edging his tone. "Backup protocols initializing, but we've lost shielding on 23 vessels." Zachary's gaze darted between the unfolding chaos and the Earth below. "Supreme Commander, we must regroup. Their attacks are surgical, targeting our support systems. If we press forward without addressing this..." "We press forward," Zara roared. "This is nothing more than a final act of desperation. Humanity cannot sustain this effort." But Zachary wasn't so sure. Desperation, after all, was a weapon in its own right, one the Corvette had never needed to wield, but which humanity seemed to master with frightening ease. As the Corvette scrambled to restore their systems, humanity's trump card revealed itself. From hidden silos deep beneath the surface, the Aegis planetary cannons fired their first salvo. Massive beams of concentrated energy tore through the atmosphere, striking the Corvette command ships with unerring accuracy. The Invincible itself shuddered under the assault, alarms wailing as hull breaches erupted along its sides. Zara gripped the armrests of his throne, his composure finally cracking. "How?" he snarled. "How do they possess such technology?" Zachary, for once, allowed himself a small, grim smile. "They've been studying us, Commander, just as we studied them." The humans weren't merely defending themselves. They were learning. Each encounter, each skirmish, provided them with data to refine their strategies and weapons. For every Corvette advantage, humanity found a counter. And as the Aegis cannons continued to fire, the balance of power shifted. Back on Earth, Steele watched the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. They'll regroup soon, he said. We bought time, but not much. Morales, how long until the drones are ready? Another 12 hours minimum, she replied. We're pushing them faster than we should, but they'll be operational. Good. Make sure they're armed with the EMP payloads. If we can blind their fleet again, we might just push them back. The Corvette, meanwhile, found themselves in unfamiliar territory. For the first time in centuries, they were being outmaneuvered. Their fleet, though still formidable, was bleeding resources at an unsustainable rate. Zara's orders grew increasingly frantic, his once imposing presence now a shadow of its former self. As the battle raged on, Izakare observed humanity's tactics with a mixture of awe and dread. They were not merely fighting for survival. They were evolving, transforming into something far more dangerous than the Corvette had anticipated. And as the Invincible shuddered under another impact, he couldn't help but wonder if the Supreme Commander's hubris had doomed them all. The smoke of orbital battle hung heavy in the atmosphere, creating auroras of destruction visible across the globe. From the ruined command deck of the Invincible, Supreme Commander Zara glared out at the planet that had defied him. Panels sparked around him, and the once pristine command station was now a chaotic mess of shattered screens and injured officers. Despite the damage, Zara's pride remained intact, though it was tempered now by an undeniable realization. Humanity had been underestimated. Izakare, blood seeping from a wound on his temple, approached the Supreme Commander cautiously. The alien officer's usually sharp, deliberate movements were replaced with an air of caution, as though even breathing too loudly might spark Zara's infamous wrath. Supreme Commander, Izakare began, his voice low and steady. The fleet cannot sustain this. We've lost nearly 40% of our vessels, and their countermeasures continue to adapt faster than our systems can recalibrate. Zara's expression was unreadable, but his claws flexed against the armrest of his throne-like chair. The great Corvette fleet does not retreat, he said, his voice cold and unyielding. This insolent species must be crushed, not merely defeated. Call for reinforcements from the 12th Armada. Izakare hesitated, his sharp gaze flickering to the remaining tactical displays. Reinforcements will take days, Supreme Commander. By then, this engagement could be over, one way or another. He allowed the last words to linger, testing their impact. Zara rose from his chair with deliberate slowness, his towering form casting a shadow across the damaged bridge. Do you think they can win? He asked, his voice a dangerous whisper. These primitives? These insects? Izakare met his superior's eyes, his own expression firm despite the flicker of fear within. They are no longer the prey we believed them to be, Commander. They have studied us, learned from us, and I fear they are learning faster than we can adapt. Zara's jaw tightened, his pride warring with the cold logic of his officer's words. Before he could reply, another alarm screamed across the bridge. Energy surge detected, an officer called out. It's coming from Earth's surface. On the planet below, General Steele stood at the command bunker center, surrounded by holographic displays. Dr. Morales leaned over a console, her brow slick with sweat as she worked frantically to coordinate the next stage of the battle. The drones are online, General, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. They're armed with EMP payloads and set to target their reinforcement ships. Steele gave a curt nod. Good. Deploy them in waves. Make it look like we're holding nothing back. We need to draw them closer to the atmosphere. Dr. Morales glanced up, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. And if they don't take the bait? Steele allowed himself a grim smile. They will. Zara's pride won't let him leave without a decisive victory. We're about to give him one, just not the kind he expects. Above Earth, the Corvette fleet began its descent into the upper atmosphere, positioning themselves to annihilate what remained of humanity's ground defenses. Zara's voice rang across the fleet-wide comms. Focus fire on their population centers. If their armies won't break, We will destroy their will to fight. Izakare stiffened at the command. Supreme Commander, targeting civilian populations. Do you question my orders, strategist? Zara's tone cut like a blade, leaving no room for dissent. Izakare swallowed his protests. Despite his unease, he returned to his console, his claws moving deftly across the controls. Yet deep in his core, he could not shake the feeling that this war was slipping further out of their control. On Earth, Steele watched as the Corvette fleet repositioned. They're moving into range, he said, his voice tense. Initiate the final phase. Morales hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Yes, General. Activating the Skybreaker array. The Skybreaker was Earth's last and most ambitious weapon, a network of orbital satellites, each equipped with experimental energy dispersal technology. When activated, the array would create a massive electromagnetic field, disrupting all advanced technology within its radius. It was a weapon of desperation, one that would leave Earth as vulnerable as the Corvette fleet, but if timed correctly, it would level the playing field. As the array activated, the first effects were immediate. The Corvette fleet's targeting systems flickered and died, their weapons sputtering uselessly as they lost power. Ships began to drift, their engines failing. Even the mighty Invincible was not immune, its lights dimming as its systems collapsed. Zara slammed a clawed hand against his throne, his fury erupting in a roar that echoed across the silent bridge. What is happening? He demanded. Izakare's voice was grim. An electromagnetic disruption, Supreme Commander. Our systems are completely compromised. On Earth, Steele watched as the Corvette fleet faltered. Now, he said, launch the counterattack. From hidden bases across the globe, humanity's remaining forces surged upward. Swarms of fighter jets, retrofitted with old-world tech immune to the electromagnetic disruption, ascended into the chaos. The skies above Earth became a battlefield once more, but this time, the advantage was undeniably humanity's. The Corvette, stripped of their technological superiority, fought with desperation. But for every human vessel that fell, 3 Corvette ships were destroyed. On the Invincible, Zara's composure finally broke. He turned to Izakare, his voice a mixture of rage and desperation. This is your fault, he spat. You should have anticipated. Izakare cut him off, his voice sharp and unyielding. You refused to listen. You ignored the warnings, the evidence that they were adapting faster than we expected. This is your failure, Commander. For a moment, Zara looked ready to strike his officer. But before he could act, a massive explosion rocked the Invincible. Fire consumed the rear sections of the ship as alarms screamed once more. Impact on the engine core, an officer shouted. We're losing structural integrity. Zara slumped back into his chair, the weight of defeat finally pressing down on him. Order the retreat, he muttered, his voice hollow. Izakare blinked, stunned. Supreme Commander? Order the retreat, Zara repeated, louder this time. Get us out of here before we lose everything. The retreat order rippled through the remnants of the Corvette fleet. Damaged ships disengaged, their engines sputtering as they limped away from Earth. Humanity's forces pursued them for a time, ensuring their departure, but Steele called for restraint. Let them go, he said. They'll think twice before coming back. As the last Corvette ship disappeared into the void, a cheer erupted across Earth's defenses. Against all odds, humanity had survived. In the command bunker, Steele turned to Morales, exhaustion etched into his face. Good work, Doctor, he said. You just saved the species. Morales smiled faintly, though her eyes were heavy. For now, she said. But they'll be back. Steele nodded, his expression hardening. Let them. Next time, we'll be ready